Hello and welcome to the Amplifier Podcast, the show where the best in business discuss how you can grow your business best. I'm Wyatt McPherson, I produce this show, and this week our host Don Cooper is speaking with Susan Gilbert for her second of 3 episodes with us. Susan is a best-selling author, a top 100 marketing influencer, and someone who loves to help other entrepreneurs create foundational material in the form of major market books. Don and Susan discuss business leaders achieving a higher purpose, why all entrepreneurs should be writing books, and how all of this can help you and your business elevate to new and greater levels. It is an amazing conversation, so make sure you check out our other 2 episodes with Susan and subscribe so you don't miss any in the future. With all of that said, though, I truly do hope that you enjoy this episode of the Amplifier Podcast.
Let's dive in a little bit and just talk about why entrepreneurs should write a book then.
Yeah, well, there's some real basic things about why they should write it, because there's nothing like a book as that foundational piece. We were talking a little earlier using the analogy of building a house. You wouldn't go to Home Depot and buy some lumber and nails and come home and think you're going to build a house. You might be able to pull that off, Don, but the average person.
No, I'm a Colby 7473. So my 3 is my implementer. I do a lot of stuff around my property, but I think it's my quick start that allows me to kind of jump in and take on projects around my property, and I love doing that. But I'm not a quality craftsman.
Well, we'll work on that when we write a book together, because the idea, the core message, that's the foundation. And when you get to that core message that's the foundation, there's nothing like it to express that person, that entrepreneur's unique brand. It'll amplify the business. So, the Amplifier Podcast, it will amplify the business, but it makes you stand out because nobody else has that.
Sure.
There's a lot of other people in the industry, but there's nobody that's going to have your perspective and that passion that is there. And we just unearth it and get it out and release it. And then as a part of that, your book gives you the visibility and authority and credibility like nothing else. I mean, almost everybody says, if you're an author, they're like, wow, you're an author. Even as easy as it is to publish now compared to where it was 20 years ago when I first got into it and people weren't self-publishing for the most part. So, but the credibility remains the same. And those of us that are in the industry, we know it's not that hard to publish a book, but it is hard to write that quality book that does something very different and uniquely than anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, I love that creative process of, and for me, when I write my shorter books, getting ready for the book, thinking about what I want to share actually, unlocks the, what's trapped in your head. And a lot of people go, well, I don't know, I don't have enough to say. But once you pick when you pick the topic and then you start to think about the sequence of how I want to share value and how that builds up, a lot of the value that I have trapped in my head can't actually come out until I write that book.
Yes. Well,
right?
As entrepreneurs, we're creative.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be entrepreneurs if we weren't creative. And so otherwise we'd go work for a company and just follow the routine for the job description. And, there's nothing wrong with that. But for those of us who are entrepreneurs who either have chosen it or got catapulted, I got catapulted into it. But for those of us who, and then I continued down that road, but as entrepreneurs, we're creative people. And so writing a book is a very creative process. Yeah. And you can get stuck in the creativity, and that's when we spin in circles, or if we're following a framework and we know that kind of, the Stephen Covey start with the end in mind. Yes. If we know why are we doing this? Then that helps to contain, because we have more creative ideas probably than we'll ever be able to get out on paper. But here's a tip that not many people talk about, but for those of us who have multiple books in them, if you can plan it out, that you're going to write this book this year, this book next year, then you have that through line. And my client, Rick Cesari, that's what we've been doing. We've been doing a book a year.
For me, I mean, some people might have it that they want to write a book. I just feel that the going through the book process unleashes creativity in a way that I hadn't experienced if I was sitting there, I mean, way back when in school, when you were assigned to do a book report and write an essay on someone else's work. It was nowhere near the way that when you go through the planning and the thinking about what you want to share, it seems like there's, the floodgates open up. And by the time I finish a book, I've already got ideas for 3 more.
That's wonderful. Well, plan them out, because once you know what they are and you've done the process, it's just a matter of going back and the process that worked for you. Like some people are really good at speaking. I'm working with a real estate agent. She's not a realtor who owns an agency that has about 50 realtors working for her. And she's a people person. She's got to be talking. She said, I can't sit down and write at the computer because I'm doing contracts all day long. So I don't want to do it that way. And I got her set up with Otter, which she was not familiar with. Yeah. And now she's sitting on her deck looking out over the lake there at Coeur d'Alene and talking her book. So it's also finding the process that allows you to be creative.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I really learned that the right, using the right channels for the right people is so key. We're, one of the core values in our business is always growing. And so we actually buy libraries of books for our staff to learn and grow. So because when I came up, before I was an entrepreneur, I was an intrapreneur. I was inside of other organizations, and I was really great at starting a new office or bringing a new brand into a country, and I would take it so far, and then I would continue to expand new offerings beyond what the founders or owners of those companies, some public, some private, would do, and I would get bored with the constraint of, okay, just run it now. No, I want to grow it. I want to turn it into something. And what I realized, and I spent half of my career in the industrial space as an intrapreneur. And I'd always get to some point where I'd get frustrated with, don't these guys have a vision for what we could do?
Exactly.
And inevitably I would leave, and then I'd go start something new. And I did that for 10, maybe 15 years. And then it struck me that I've just got to do this myself so that I can really have that creative freedom to listen to what my customers and clients want and need, or what they need solved, and then figure out how to solve it, and constantly innovating. So my industrial business is called Innovator, and my business that I help other entrepreneurs with is Amplifier. And some people look at me and go, well, those 2 things seem so different. And I said, well, no, they're just me. Right? It's just me. And the only reason that it's 2 things is because it really serves 2 different kinds of clients that I'm both passionate about. And I'm always reinventing new things in both, just as an expression of my own creativity, I think.
Yes. Well, so smart that you can do them both and do them simultaneously. I tend to jump ship. Now, the work that I'm currently doing now is probably the longest work, because I've been doing it for 20 years. So it's the longest thing I've ever done. But my backstory, you always talk about the signature story, is that when I was 25, I was married, and I had married very young because I married my first boyfriend. When he returned from Vietnam, and he came home all in one piece. He was healthy. And so we got married. And then 8 years later, he was diagnosed with acute myelogenous leukemia, which we learned long afterwards that was from Agent Orange. But they gave him 6 weeks to live. He lived 9 months. But during that 9 months, my mother was diagnosed with cancer of the liver that had spread from her colon. And in the span of 1 year, I lost both of them. And you might think, at 25, well, you're an adult, but you're not prepared to lose a parent. You're not prepared to lose a spouse. And the plan had been that I would go to college when he finished his education. And he was 3 credits away from graduating from the University of Pittsburgh when he died. So I'm like, no income, no education. What am I going to do? And I knew because he had finished out his tour of duty, the last few months we were married in Santa Ana, California. So in California, you could establish residency, and I think it was 1 year, and go to a state college. So I uprooted myself, and I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and moved from Pittsburgh to Santa Ana, California. And people said, how did you do that? Well, I didn't have anything to lose.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened in the interim before I got the time requirement filled in is that I was offered a job selling microcomputers, the old CPM operating system, the predecessor to the IBM PC, which then when I started selling those, I started selling the IBM PC, built a business for those people, which I really resonate with what you were talking about. Like I did it for them, but they had a myopic view of what this could look like. AT&T saw, everybody in San Diego, which is where I was living, knew that I was the go-to person. They bought PCs in hundreds at a time. And AT&T offered me a position to head up their, it was called the National Data Sales Organization, to come in and train their staff on selling microcomputers. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven because that chip that was on my shoulder that I'd never gotten that college education, and here's AT&T bringing me in at an executive level.
Yeah.
And the guys that I had been working for said, Susan, we understand why you're doing this, but you're an entrepreneur, and you're not going to be able to stay with that company. And they were absolutely right. So I went from that to opening up coffee shops before anybody knew who Starbucks was, to self-publishing books before anybody knew what self-publishing was, which is now what we've been talking about. But that takes creativity to do that.
Sure,
it takes
absolutely.
creativity and imagination, and also an inner trust in yourself that you're going to land on your feet.
Did you ever go back and get that degree?
No.
So
No.
I want to show you, I always love having these kinds of conversations.
They kept telling me to go to school for engineering, electrical engineering. I don't even know what that is, but somehow my aptitude test said I had good 3D spatial, I was good at math, whatever that might have been. I probably would be working for a company as an engineer, took my retirement, went off and did whatever. But the fact that I didn't have training, and I had to keep reinventing myself, or I was choosing to reinvent myself because I was bored and I wanted to try something new. And I trusted that I'd fall on I'd land on my feet. I might, fall over from time to time, but I always be able to get back up and land on my feet again. That's what gives me the background and the wisdom to be able to do the work I do today.
Absolutely. I was doing criminology with a plan to go into law school afterwards. And I'm so, looking back now, I had a chip on my shoulder that I didn't get to go to law school when I was in my early 20s. But looking back now, I'm like, God, I'm glad I'm not a lawyer. I don't think I would have, and I'm sure there's people who love practicing law, and if that's for them, I just think, knowing what I've discovered about myself over my life, I need that creative ability to push forward. But, the real spark, though, I think I look back on not finishing university as a blessing for me, because that striving for, I think at the time I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I thought, I needed the status of a degree, right? Was the thing. When I really processed it, it was about, okay, I need to get the status so that I can say that I have that, and my family didn't have that, and whatnot. But the blessing that I got from that was I had such a hunger and a thirst for learning and growing that, I have friends who, went and got a degree, went and got a second degree, but outside of that academic pursuit, they don't learn and grow at all. They don't, I read and do deep dives on books. I probably read 50 books a year, maybe. Sometimes 5 at a time, depending on what my interests are.
Yeah.
And and the ones that really connect with me, they're dog-eared, they're marked up. I end up going back to the author and getting to know them. I end up in a workshop. The big deep dive that I've done this past year that I really loved was working with Dr. BJ Fogg.
Oh yeah, he's
great.
great.
So, got his book, which was great, but then he ended up becoming a member of Genius Network, and we did a 10-week workshop inside of Genius Network where he did a deep dive into that methodology. And then I joined his behavior design workshop at Stanford that he does, and went into another 8 weeks of really understanding how you can design behaviors in processes, in products, in how you can create and predict a sets of behaviors so that you can get goals accomplished on teams. Fascinating stuff. But I have this hunger and thirst for growing that I don't think I would have had, or I suspect anyway, that I don't think I would have had if I had just sort of followed that other, structured learning approach that is academia, right? Which I think if you're wired that way, I think it's great to do that.
But just even a specialized training, as in the example that, I taken some individual courses at the Penn State Extension where I lived, and I just couldn't afford to both support myself and pay for the education, which is what precipitated the move. And that's where I'd gone through the testing. And they're like, oh, they're hiring women, you can become an electrical engineer with an associate's degree. And I realized I probably would have done that if I didn't have, as you're calling it, that hunger. Like, no, that's not what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I know that isn't it. But had I done that, I don't know that, because I think once you're in that path, which is that parable that I was telling you about that I wrote from Messengers on a Mission, he became a pilot because his father was a pilot. Right. And once we go through a particular level of training and we go down a path, if we don't have that hunger to explore, the desire or the boredom to learn something new or try something new, then we're just going to stay in that repetitive loop. And, it's kind of like, even, we've been talking about how entrepreneurs are creative, but often that creativity can be overshadowed, even for entrepreneurs, just stifled by the business process.
Yes.
And then the creativity gets left simmering on the back burner. So kudos to you that despite the fact that you're running basically 2 businesses and have a family, that you still are keeping that creativity alive, because creativity is something that has to be cultivated and it has to be maintained.
And there you have it. Thank you everybody so much for listening to this episode of the Amplifier Podcast. If you would like to get in touch with Don or Susan and discover more of what both of them can do for you, then you can always find both of their links in the description of this episode. We did 3 episodes in total with Susan, so definitely make sure you go and check out the other 2. And make sure you leave a 5-star rating. It truly does help us out a lot. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss any future episodes. With all of that said, though, I truly do hope that you've enjoyed this episode of the Amplifier Podcast, and we shall see you next time.